interesting panel. Yesterday, Pari started off by saying that, what's the need of transformation at a GIC level. That was followed up by Daniel and Sandeep talking about, what are the, how the India itself should transform. When they say India, the entire industry in India has to transform. So we are going to follow up on one of those threads. As the center evolves, as the industry evolves, as well as the centers in India evolves, the leaders on the kind of activities that they were tasked with to start off is rapidly changing, right? I mean, like, that is a reality for every one of us in the industry today. There is no more this mentality of hiring somebody who has done it before, who are doers. As the world becomes complex, as the products that you are working on becomes complex, you really need people who are a lot more collaborative. And that, whether believe it or not, actually also is true for the leaders as well, right? So one of the interesting, so we kind of wanted to in the interest of time, we want to just pick on one of the specific topics of collaboration and some of the key qualities of leadership, that is about listening, right? So that is, as the management guru Ramcharan has said that about 25% of the leaders don't listen. They just want to give their opinion and tell you what to do, and that's it. They don't want to listen. And as I mentioned, that's not how companies are built. That's not how the successful leaders have built their organizations. And it is extremely critical that you listen to the team, you collaborate with the team, you solve the problems together. So we will, we have an unbelievable amount of experience in this panel. We have Ram from VMware, we have Deepak from NetApp, and we have Jen from Rocket Software, who have worked in global locations, who have managed large global teams. They have been center heads, so they have seen their own transformation as well. So with that, maybe Ram, we will start off with you. So how important is listening important from your perspective?
Well. Yeah, I mean, I could sit there and talk all day, but no, I think nobody will appreciate that. But I think you bring up a great point. I think, first of all, you start off with the position that you don't know everything, right?
Right.
And the only way you can learn about what is going on, every day is a new day, every hour is a new hour. The only way you can learn is by talking to people and listening to what they have to tell you. And I think it's important to differentiate between listening and hearing. So you really, you're vested and you're kind of truly listening and imbibing what you're hearing from others in terms of what's going on.
Yeah, good. So let's go with that same topic, Jen. What do you think? I mean, you have a different role than the other two gentlemen here. So what do you think about the importance of listening within your organization, within the teams that you're managing?
So listening is all about absorbing the information that's being shared with you and then acting upon that information. So it's not just a conversation between two people. Listening actually involves action items that the other person is going to do, but also what you're going to do to resolve the challenge that's being discussed.
Okay. Deepak will change. It's probably going to be the same thing, right? Otherwise, so we'll change the topic and talk about.
Well, I was all ready with my answer.
Okay. No, we'll change the topic for you. How do you listen? How do you effectively listen?
Well, I think there are a couple of things, right? If it also depends on what you're doing. For example, no disrespect to the media folks or anything like that, but if you're running a TV debate, I guess you don't need to listen, right? But if you are in the corporate world and then you are running large organizations and you want to, there are two ways, right, in terms of being able to build that capability. You can institutionalize a program,
okay,
or you can also do something grassroots, right? But at the end of the day, predominantly for us in our world, it's really about either you're listening to your customers,
okay,
if you're really building a product. If you're really doing engineering, if you're not listening to customers, then they may not really need what you're building.
Okay.
Number two is you're actually listening to your employees in terms of their needs and what their experience is, right? And if you're not doing that, then you're probably not having a workforce that is most productive, that is a high-performing one to do. So definitely, there is no doubt that listening has to be an integral part of a leadership quotient.
But my question specifically to you is, How do you do that? How do you train yourself?
A couple of things that I personally do is that when I'm listening to someone or when I'm in a meeting, what have you, I tend to write down the most important takeaways for me.
Okay.
Second thing probably is really about not asking questions for the sake of asking, but really, for the sake of understanding. I think Ram mentioned about listening versus hearing, right?
Yeah.
You could just hear and walk away, versus you can actually listen and understand the key takeaways. If I am just seeing a set of data without necessarily having a key takeaway, I would probably ask that question in terms of what are the key takeaways, or if there are specific things. And there are tools and things that you may want to use as far as those listening skills.
Okay.
To record stuff, to action, things that you take away. Those are typically simplest things that I tend to do.
Okay, perfect. Jen, is there anything else specifically that you do? You have like a global team, and you kind of work with them all the time. So how do you, one is listening person to person. The other one is listening when you're remote. So
Right.
how do you do that?
I take notes. So there are 3 ways that people learn. One is orally. If you hear it, you're probably going to forget it. And then there's visually. If you hear it and see it, you're probably going to remember it, but probably is not something I like to bank my money on. Then there's the kinesthetic learner. If you're writing it down, you've heard it, you've seen it, now you're writing it down, you're going to remember it. And so when I'm on a phone call and I have my global teams on a call and I need to make sure that I am listening and hearing, then I write things down. But then again, I follow up on those action items that everybody is accountable for.
Okay. Ram, different question for you. In your career, what are certain things that you have done, or what are some of the job roles that have helped you to become a better leader? But that means that a collaborative leader.
Sure. So I think, a couple of points here. One is, as a jump function, I came out of the product management ranks. And by necessity, you are listening to a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders, internally and externally to that. And one of the things that you learn along the way, and which I think, I wasn't good at it and maybe I became better at it later, is to listen to the soft signals that are coming. Because a lot of times what people are really telling you is not the underlying reason why they're telling you that. There's something a little deeper, perhaps, when you're having a conversation, in terms of probing. And I think to Deepak's point, it's about asking those clarifying questions. I think a lot of times when you ask clarifying questions when you're talking to somebody, they feel that you're actually listening to them, because the fact that you're asking clarifying questions, right? You heard what they said, and then you're coming back and kind of playing it back to them in the form of a question. That's one. 2, you're probing deeper, right? Why, right? They say the 6 wise men, the 5 W's and the H.
Yeah.
To a large extent, those are some skills that you use when you're listening to somebody, is to start to probe and understand where are they coming from. The third part is setting aside your agenda. I think that is the most critical part. Your mind is very busy.
Yes.
So when somebody is telling you something, right, when they're talking to you, you're reacting to it. Your mind is constantly like, there is a reflex that is coming up saying, hey, maybe this, maybe that. So you need to learn to quieten your mind so you're actually listening to somebody and you're imbibing what they're trying to tell you. I think these would be the 3 things that I have learned in my career in terms of, getting better at listening to people.
Oh, great. So I know that a lot of the people in the audience, they are basically people who are aspiring to be the leaders, or people who are going through the transformation itself. So what we'll do is maybe we'll start off by taking some questions from the audience as we are getting engaged on this topic. Sorry, I'm not able to see. Any questions? So we'll start off. Yes, right there.
Can you get him a mic?
Can we get a mic there?
Yeah, hi. My question is to Jennifer. So you obviously have interacted with partners across the globe, and of course Indian leaders as well. What can you tell with respect to what qualities do you think Indian leaders should imbibe from American leaders, or vice versa?
That's actually a really good question, and it's been asked in slightly different ways in the past. But follow through and being able to deliver on an outcome that you can benchmark is critical. Leadership skills involve other things, but first and foremost, the execution and the ability to follow through on a responsibility is one of the first markers of a leader.
Great. Let me follow up on that question for you, Deepak. You have worked in US under different leadership there, and you have come here. You have worked under a leadership of an organization, and now you're a leader yourself. Do you see there is fundamental difference between global your headquarters versus here?
Well, I think there are different organizations at different maturity levels as they go through that kind of a transformation, right?
Okay.
Today, you will actually see a lot of the organizations mature enough where they don't necessarily differentiate leaders in different geos, right? A leader in India is a leader in somewhere in Europe versus a leader in any part of the US for that matter. And you will find leaders running global functions based out of any of these geographies.
Sure.
So fundamentally, I think the leadership qualities don't change.
Okay.
But there are local nuances that one needs to learn in terms of really being able to understand some of the culture. If you are leading a large organization in India, there are cultural aspects that you want to keep in mind when you lead that team versus something else in some other parts of the world. As long as you have the cultural aspects of it imbibed in your leadership.
What's the biggest one, if I may ask? What's in your experience?
I think, to some extent, it's really about, I'll tell you my experience, right?
Sure.
When I first moved back, I would ask the status of, a project, and typically the answer I would get is almost done. Anything I ask is almost done. So what is almost done? I don't know what is almost done, right? So, how do you get yourself trained to be able to understand, okay, almost done is like maybe 80%, or someone doesn't want to really tell you what it is, or would have you. So you kind of get imbibed with that kind of understanding, right? So overall, from a leadership perspective, I think it's all the same. You're running a large organization. Doesn't matter which part of the world. You're really, what is important is you wear the company hat.
Sure.
Right? When you are making decisions as a leader, you are actually looking first what is right for the company, and then the rest of the hierarchy comes into place. And if you do that, I think to the most part you will be making the right decisions. And then it's just about keeping the right frame of mind in terms of understanding people in the local aspect.
Ram, you have worked across various industries as well as various not only segments of the industries, but also the sizes of the industries, right? Mm-hmm. Have you seen any nuances in terms of the leadership style?
Yeah, see, the thing is, I think Deepak brought up the points. If you mean my personal leadership style? Or
no. When you...
when you're a leader and you're... No, I think the cultural nuances play out dramatically. I mean, I had a role in one of the companies I was working for where I had teams in different parts of the geos. So it's not just between headquarters in India.
Sure.
I had teams reporting to me from Southeast Asia, India, Latin America, Middle East, and US. And it was very interesting because when you would have a staff meeting, you have people from various cultures, and when you're addressing them or addressing your larger teams, you had to keep the cultural lens. And I wasn't, I didn't realize this initially, right? Because different cultures also here, you're a sum total of your own experiences, right? Which is part of growing up, life and work. And so as a leader, you almost have to tune yourself to who you're addressing, because how it lands with them and how they interpret it and how they execute could change dramatically based on where you are and who you're talking to.
Sure.
So I think that was one, as a leader, you need to, that plays out both from a listening perspective, because they may communicate things very differently to you, right? So you can't take things at face value. To this point about, almost done, is acceptable in a lot of cultures.
Right.
But, Swalpa Adjust Madi is a common refrain, right? So I think if you are coming in with a lens of somebody who's, wants every I dotted and every T crossed, and you are coming in and somebody tells you Swalpa Adjust Madi, right? I mean, you have no idea how to interpret this.
Sure.
So you have to learn how to get past that.
Okay.
Cultures sometimes don't change, and you have to adjust yourself to the environment.
Absolutely. There was a question right there.
Yeah. So more of question is just what I find another aspect of listening is like we always should look into the intent what other is speaking instead of going by word or word by. Some people are not very good using the good word, to express themselves. So as one of the important aspect of the listening is we should go by intent of the person instead of evaluating each and every word that he is speaking of. So that's something I find is another aspect of the listening good part of. So panelists, do you agree with that, or do you think it's not
Jen, you want
a way?
to take that question?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the clarifying questions that Ram was talking about. So you can never really assume someone's intent. What you really can judge them by are their outward actions or what they're saying. So you definitely need to start digging in with some clarifying questions to truly understand the source of their concern or the cause of the conversation to begin with.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think sorry, I just wanted to add just a point to that. Sometimes they're not comfortable in oral communication, but this comes up when you're dealing with a lot of people from various cultures, etc. Right? So one of the things I like to do, if they are not comfortable, or I'm not understanding completely where they're coming from, I give them a task. I say, go back, you think it through, write it down, and send it back to me. Right? Sometimes that helps to clarify in their own minds too as to what is it that they're really wanting out of this conversation. And then it becomes easier to come back and have a second level conversation with somebody.
You have a comment?
If I may add, I think often enough I also see I will probably say I will disagree. Right? It's predominantly assuming that somebody can read the intent. I think is mostly lack of preparedness. And if the speaker is trying to get across something, he should be prepared. I think it is a question of being able to put that into practice and practice a lot. Sometimes probably, most of us don't necessarily see or understand how much preparedness goes into a leadership role when someone is actually speaking on a stage, when someone is really trying to get something across, and it doesn't come free. So it takes effort, and it can't be for the lack of effort that one would say somebody should understand the intent, right? It's really the speaker's responsibility to make sure they are communicating and they put everything into it, rather than assuming the listening people can understand the intent.
Okay. While we will take questions, if you have any questions, please. Yeah, there was a question here. So while they bring up the mic, okay, go ahead, please.
Yeah. Most of you, I think you're using English as a medium, okay? What's your experience when you have to manage with a different culture? For example, I work for a French company. I'm still learning in 14 years.
Anybody has experience?
I will tell them Solpa just party as well. But I don't know. I mean, fortunately, I haven't really had the need, to really practice any other language. And fortunately, I've basically worked for American companies all my life. So honestly, I haven't had the need. I don't know, Jen, have you had any?
You have teams across the
experience?
globe, right? I mean, like, how do you?
I do. So, in listening, I think I heard you, but can you state your question in a different way?
So basically, they were bringing up the language nuances.
Yeah.
As well.
You discussed about the intent aligning to the culture, but how will you bring, because even if you have a right intent and you understand the culture, you try to understand, but how will you present in an executive forum or in a meeting, because you need to achieve some consensus at the end of the meeting?
So just to put some real-world spin on this, I have a large team in Russia, and the culture was very different, and the way they communicate is very different. And I had to pull a trustworthy peer aside to talk to him about how I was going to present some material to my Russian team so that they would understand what the task was and then begin executing on it. And it all came down to don't use slang, keep your sentences a simple sentence, one noun, one verb, right? One subject, one verb. And that helped a great deal, but that took all the flavor out of it, because then suddenly I became a robot. And the presentation was very dull, and the project didn't get off to a good start. So I had to go back to the drawing board, and I had to pull a different person aside, and I asked them to add some color back to how I communicate. So he taught me some phrases in Russian, and then I recommend go buying a Russian software CD that you can learn the language yourself, because it turned out that was not the best method.
That's your answer.
Yeah.
So I think understanding the color and the flavor of your peers might be best served by connecting with someone that you trust to help you understand how you should communicate a little bit better.
But I would add one point to this. I think being part of a global company, irrespective of where the headquarters is and which company it's domiciled in, or which country it's domiciled in, there is something about diversity and inclusion that comes with being a global company, right? You're always going to have people, even if you're an American multinational company, and which is where most of us probably have our roots, you still have people from various cultures. And this is true if you're a French company or if you're from some other country. So I think the company needs to have a way to integrate people from various cultures and people who are comfortable with various languages and communication styles. And I think, I would go back to your company if you're not comfortable in that culture and say, where is the diversity and inclusion coming into the picture? So it's not about only you adjusting to their culture. It's about the company adjusting to your operating style as well. And I think that is a hallmark of a global company, right? If not, it's not a global company. So I don't know which company you work for, and I don't want to call out names, but that's the first step. If you're not comfortable there, then you're not comfortable. And something has to change.
It's more than the comfortability, it's an efficiency, because...
no, it's both. I'm sorry, it's both. Efficiency comes from comfort. Right? Both have to go hand in hand.
But you will emerge as a leader if you're able to get past that hurdle. Because if the company doesn't provide it for you, you still need some way to get through that.
There's no issue on that emerging, and it's working well. But I'm trying to get an opinion from different leaders. Yeah. So how they manage to crack this problem. Everyone is finding their own way. I'm just finding some better way than what I'm doing today. That's
Absolutely. No, thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll move on to other question.
Yeah, just a question out of my personal curiosity, nothing to do with my company. So what I have observed that GICs, when they look for site leaders, they typically hire for people who have a certain pedigree, people who have studied in America, worked there for a long time, and they're returning back to India. So people like us who have not been lucky and fortunate to have studied and worked there, do we have any chance to become a site leader someday?
I'll put a different spin to that question as well. I mean, there are a very good question there, and the related question is, there was site leaders hired with certain experience and certain capabilities, right? As the site itself is evolving, the industry is evolving. What other aspects of skills would people be looking for, and how would the people who are aspiring to get into that leadership role level prepare themselves? Sure. To start,
you want to take it,
Deepak?
Sure. So to that point, right, yes, I agree in terms of there has been a history where you've seen that kind of talent, come through as site leaders. I think more so in terms of in the recent times, if you see the definition of a site leader has changed phenomenally, right? And you don't necessarily typically have a site leader who only looks at the just the site in terms of the operational part of the site. A lot of the leaders today actually have some kind of a functional role, either global or local, whatever it may be. In terms of vertical functions, whether it is a business role or otherwise in terms of whether it is services, whatever that kind of role may be. And increasingly, you will actually see, that kind of program that has been put together over the years is starting to bear fruit, where you will actually see leaders coming to that level of leadership who are not necessarily spent their time elsewhere, globally or done, there are certainly more examples of that. So I don't necessarily differentiate that if we're looking for a leader that they must have a tenure elsewhere. I don't think that's necessarily a requirement for the job description as such, right? You may find some of them when you're doing the search who may do better through the interviews or who may fare better, for the job. But at the same time, I think it is very an equal opportunity for everyone, and the landscape is available. and more, and so, we are definitely seeing people who are capable, who necessarily don't have that, experience from a global perspective, right? I think it's also the question of role that they play, whether is it completely self-contained versus, is there a distributed organization kind of a role, or what have you?
In the interest of time, let's segue into a different topic, which is very, very relevant, right? We've been talking about leadership. Leadership is not just the person who's a site leader or, one or two people, right? We are talking about also the mid-management. So, Ram, you want to kind of share some thoughts on, people inherently are not born listeners. That's the reality, right? So how do you make them realize that this is a very important skill, and it is not only important skill for them personally, but also for an organization? So how do you coach them? How do you mentor them to become better listeners, better collaborators?
Sure. So I think, first of all, you have to play that role yourself. So I think a lot of people learn by watching others operate. So I think if you're not embodying that spirit of having, taking the effort to listen to people, playing it back, having that two-way dialogue happen, then you're not, that's not a good starting point. So to me, that's the first starting point is, are you communicating across the organization? Are you taking the time to meet with people? Are you taking the time? And it's not just, the leadership, right? It's not one level below you. It's taking the time to actually cut across the organization in many different ways and providing opportunities for a dialogue, right? So for example, in my previous role, I've just got into this role and we're starting to do this. I used to do coffee sessions with individual contributors, right? Where 10 people, we come into a room and open-ended, there's no agenda, just have a conversation, right? That opens up the dialogue. You hear various things. So that's one thing, right? How do you emulate that and how do you actually do that? With leaders, I think it is much more deliberate, in terms of working with them on their styles. Each person is individually different. So how do you interpret that, work with them, ask them the questions, make sure that they are doing it with their teams, institutionalizing it across the organization.
Okay, great. Jen, any thoughts on that? How do you equip the mid-management team or coach them or mentor them?
So we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and the joke is you should be listening twice as often as you're speaking, but human beings, we don't do that. We always like to be heard. And ultimately, your middle managers are looking to be heard by you as their leader to resolve issues that they bring to you. But during your coaching sessions, providing them with some skills and some tidbits to think about when they're communicating with their direct reports will help them become better listeners. And so some of the techniques that I like to use are parrot that person and paraphrase what they're saying to you so that, as part of a practical hand guide, the advice that you give your team is mirroring what's being said to you so that you're sure you understand it. But then when the session is done with their direct report, always ask, is there anything else I can do for you? And so as you wrap up the session, you're sure that you got the nut of everything that they need resolved by you. But listening is such a multifaceted issue. It's not just a conversation, like I said. It's the actions that come after that to make sure that your direct report heard, you assure your direct report that you heard them by following through with the actions that you said you would to resolve the situation.
Deepak, I'm going to ask this same question, but different context. If you have the mid-management team not co-located with you, is there anything special that you do?
Oh, that's a pretty regular feature that happens.
Yeah.
Right? So if you have an organization that is remotely located, which I deal with, every day, there are certainly things, like we talked about. You either, you can institutionalize something,
sure,
and then you can. The one thing that I personally feel, it's not about actually just mid-management. To me, that leadership has to be at every level, and it has to be part of your value system, right? If leadership is not one of your values that you practice or live with every day, it's not going to be as successful otherwise. What I mean by that is that if there is a new college grad that comes into your system, that person needs to understand that they actually have the accountability. They are the leaders within their sphere of influence, within their sphere of responsibility, if you will. If they're responsible to write 2 lines of code, those 2 lines of code be better, that better be the best lines of code that they've written, so far in their life, right? That's the leadership that one needs to. So it's really about being able to institutionalize some of this. I'll give you an example in terms of what we do. One of the things that we do is we have our, let's say, executive briefing centers in various locations where we bring in our customers, partners, for deeper discussions, and we have significant participation from the technical community in talking to these customers. One of the things that we have a structured program in doing is called Voice of the Customer.
Okay.
Right? So that part is really all about, focused listening. Just don't say anything, listen to your customer. Please listen to what they have to say. I'm pretty sure, Ram can attest to this, especially from a product management function. But it's really about being able to listen to what they're saying, right? And we actually have a program where we rotate some of our engineering people in those sessions to be able to sit in the background and listen, and then practice some of that.
That looks like a very good practice for people to.
Some of those kind of things. And then if you want to really listen to employees, of course, there are other tools like surveys and and the more important thing is what you do about it, right? It's about hearing versus listening and acting on it. And so even if you do 1 or 2 things, if you can actually reinforce that, that you've actually done something, I think makes a heck of a lot of difference.
Okay. Is there any other question? There is one other topic I want to cover. Right there, the lady in the back, or here, whoever is the closest.
I think somebody here is with a mic.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. My name is Ashok, and I'm the co-founder of a cybersecurity company from Bangalore. So this is this is a good topic what we're discussing, and then, as you said, listening is very important part of a leadership. And then what I believe is how approachable you are to your subordinates also brings to the listening part. If you are approachable, then people come to you and they share your thoughts. Just wanted to know from the panel, what are the tips or what you do from your side to be more approachable to the people around you? Especially you are the big boss and you have been seen as the business person around. So one incident happened yesterday. One of my developers, trying to reach me, and then I said the default message saying that I'm in a meeting, I'll call you back. And then he replied back saying that, sir, this is Nishant. And then I said, really? I spent 30 minutes interviewing you, and then you're telling me like that. So there is a gap, obviously, from the approach side. So just wanted to know what you do to be more approachable to people around you. Thank you.
Great question. I think I'll add one more thing, right? I mean, leading to that is, when people are telling you, obviously you're listening, but you're not doing what they're telling you, but you still want to make sure that they keep telling you what they want to tell, right? So how do you make them that you are appreciating their thoughts and you're listening even though you're not doing it? I think leading to some of those, the experiences that he had. So any thoughts there? Maybe we'll start with Jen.
Don't multitask. When somebody comes to you with an issue, stay focused on what they're there to talk to you about. And that's fine to put time limits around it because everybody's time is, important. But don't multitask. Really give them your focused attention.
Okay. Ram?
No, I think great point. So second thing is, provide the time. Maybe depending on your style and the way your calendar works, maybe set aside some time during the week, which is like an open house, right, or an open office hours, where anybody can walk in. And be seen. The other piece is, this gets a little harder if you have remote teams, but you need to be seen more often in person, right? Rather than impersonally through emails or through other things. And when you have remote teams, you have to take the effort to get there and actually let them have some face time. And the more you're visible, the more you're, I think that itself brings down barriers in terms of hierarchy and all of the other things.
Deepak, go ahead.
Yeah, my thinking there is in terms of, candor, transparency, I think gives you a lot of credibility, right? If, you make, there's certainly times when companies go through really, harder times. I mean, just in terms of companies evolving themselves, going through transformations in multiple different ways, actually puts you in a spot where you can't do everything, that people ask, that's just the way life is, right? But the point is in terms of how are you putting that across? Are you able to articulate, why you're not doing, what you're not doing, right? At the same time, in terms of why are you doing what you're doing, both ways, right? And the idea of being able to reinforce and say, I heard you, we did X, we didn't do Y, and here is, the reason for doing or not doing it. And I think that candor and transparency builds a lot of credibility in the workforce.
There was one question right there.
Hi, I'm Satya. I have mainly a question about organizations that are going through changes. And I'm sure most organizations have gone through changes that have far-reaching impacts, both good and bad. So as leaders, what are the key traits that you think that will help you pull your people through those times, and how you will keep your team motivated and at the same time get buy-in from your people to that future that you have envisioned, that you are collaboratively moving towards?
Ram?
And somehow related question with that. I just want to understand that how emotional intelligence is important for inspiring and the established leader in this given context.
Okay. So I think on the first question in terms of so how do you engage with employees sometimes when the organization is not doing well, or there is some bad news to be delivered, or something is happening, right? And keep them motivated. I think, I don't want to keep repeating other people's points, but I think Deepak's point was very valid. I think candor is part of it, right? I mean, you are as much an employee of the company as the next person. So we are all going through this together. So it's not that, because you're higher up in management, you are insulated from some of the other happenings that may be happening. So I think being candid, of course, you may have a little more information than somebody else, and some of which you can share, some of which you can't share. But using judgment on that front, but at the same time being empathetic, having empathy for the other person in terms of understanding where they may be coming from. That's one side to it. The other piece of motivation is keep them focused, right? I mean, I've had situations in my past where we were divesting a product in one of the companies I was working for, and it was in the newspaper because it was actually getting played out in the press in terms of we were divesting it. Now, if you're a person who's working in that team, you can't hide that fact, right? Because it's public. It's being played out. I think what we can talk about is, yes, that conversation is potentially happening, but at the same time, we have a responsibility to keep the product running because the divestment may or may not happen. So we can't let the ball drop. We are there for a reason. There's a set of responsibilities and accountability that sits with us. So let's focus our energies on saying what is in our control and focusing on that and see what more we could be doing with it, rather than worrying about what is not in our control. So I think, there are various other aspects, but I think these would be a few things that I would use.
Yeah, I know we ran out of time, but I'm going to ask one more question before we move. Very pertinent question. Millennials. They suddenly want empathy. They suddenly want softer skills. So how do you deal with them? Are you going to deal with them differently than how you have dealt with the rest of the organization so far?
So I think in my case, I think we were talking about this earlier also, and I said there is a demand, not necessarily requirement. I think the refreshing part of the millennial generation is there's no fear, right? There's no hierarchy. So I've had situations where people, new college graduates have walked into my office and told me what's not working in my organization, right? Which is actually very refreshing. Now, the thing is, maybe because we have children in that age group, we can learn to deal with it, right? Because we hear that constantly. Dad, you're 100 years old, right? I mean, that's a common refrain. So anyway, maybe we know we are better at dealing with it. Where I've seen it harder is in the middle, in the middle management, where they are probably only slightly older than the people who are walking in and telling them that they are not doing things the right way. How to deal with that? And I think we have to learn how to, bring them along with their, with their expectations into the organization.
Absolutely. Jen, any final comments on that?
Yeah, so it's not just about task-oriented skills, because telling somebody what to do is part of the job description, but it involves a lot more softer skills and a lot more emotion and compassion and empathy than you might otherwise have to bring into a conversation with someone who is not a millennial.
Final thoughts, Deepak?
So, think about this as far as why do we need to deal with it differently, right? This is a generation which has probably never understood what it is to not have a TV at home. It is a generation that doesn't know how to live without a cell phone, for that matter, right? So sometimes now I talk to my daughter, and she's actually doing something when I'm talking. And then if I tell her, hey, you're not listening, and then she'll say, no, Dad, I'm cool.
I got it.
Don't worry, I got it. I heard everything you said, right? It's to that end, it is really a different way of doing things, right? And we have to understand in terms of what works. And especially in an institution when you have a larger number of them, and it does start to become behaviors and cultures, right? And you have to start looking at things differently as far as how you communicate. Nobody wants to read an email anymore.
Yep.
And so you got to do things differently. Right? Nobody wants to come to a meeting either, right? So how do you communicate, right? So it is a challenge. There's no doubt.
So on that note, we will close this panel. I mean, this is a topic that I know each one of you can spend more than a day just telling what you do on a day-to-day basis and what you have learned in your career. Thank you very much, Ram, Jen, Deepak. A big round of applause for them for sharing their thoughts. Thank you.